You stand on the frostbitten ramparts of a crumbling fortress in the shadow of jagged Carpathian peaks, the year 1241. The air bites like iron shards, carrying the acrid tang of smoke from distant thatch roofs set ablaze. Below, the horizon writhes with a sea of mounted shadows tens of thousands strong, their lamellar armor glinting dully under a leaden sky, boughs slung across backs like promises of oblivion. The thunder of hooves vibrates through the stone beneath your boots, a rhythm that drowns the frantic shouts of defenders scrambling to knock arrows. Your breath fogs the chill, tasting of fear-soured bile, as the first arrows arc skyward, whistling like vengeful spirits before thudding into flesh and timber with wet, final cracks. Women huddle in the courtyard, their woolen shawls clutched tight against the wind's howl, eyes wide with the knowledge of what follows surrender's failure. The scent of unwashed horseflesh and oiled leather rises, mingling with the metallic promise of blood yet to spill. You grip your spear, knuckles whitening, heart pounding a dirge against your ribs. They crest the ridge now, banners snapping like whips wolf's head, falcon in flight, heralding not mere conquest, but the methodical unraveling of a people's soul. These riders do not come for gold alone. They seek the fracture of lineages, the desecration of hearths. You whisper a prayer to saints long silent, but the wind devours it. They don't know yet that victory's price will be etched, not in ledgers of the slain, but in the hollow gazes of those left breathing, their bodies claimed as the ultimate trophy of subjugation. Before we venture deeper into this shadowed chronicle, a moment of candor is essential. What unfolds here involves sexual violence and systematic degradation, horrors corroborated by chronicles like those of Matthew Paris in his Chronica Majora, eyewitness accounts from Rogerius of Apulia's Carmen Miserabile, and archaeological traces unearthed in mass graves from the Mongol incursions sites yielding shattered bones and the faint, defiant scratches of Latin prayers on convent walls. These are not inventions for shock, but fragments pieced from primary sources. The secret history of the Mongols, Venetian dispatches from the Fourth Crusade, and Ottoman tax ledgers detailing the Devshirme. The weight of such truths can unsettle, stir revulsion, or despair. If this path feels too raw, if the echoes of these silences demand a pause, step away without shame. No chronicle condemns the reader who chooses light over unrelenting dark. For those who remain know this. My intent is not to linger on the wound, but to trace the veins of power that fed it. These accounts illuminate the machinery of dominion, how kings and khans forged weapons, from violation to unmake not just bodies, but the very idea of resistance. They are cautions, etched in ink and bone, reminding us that unchecked authority devours the vulnerable first. We proceed with reverence for the documented dead, focusing on the architecture of atrocity, not its fleeting grotesqueries. Let these pages be a vigil, not a spectacle. This wasn't barbarism born of chaos. This was a machine, oiled by decree and calibrated for erasure. In the medieval world, from the frost-veined steppes of Eurasia to the salt-crusted shores of the Levant, kings did not merely conquer lands. They orchestrated the humiliation of rival realms through calculated sexual desecration. What we term atrocities were protocols of psychological warfare, deployed to shatter the spirit of a kingdom before its walls crumbled. Consider the Mongol hordes under Genghis Khan, whose Yasa codes, those ironclad edicts preserved in Persian renditions by Rashid al-Din, explicitly reserved mass violation for cities that resisted, transforming mothers and daughters into symbols of a foe's impotence. Or the Crusader lords of the Latin East, whose charters from the Council of Nablus in 1120 condemned rape of Muslim slaves, yet turned a blind eye to the systemic enslavement that preceded it, as chronicled by William of Tyre. This was no aberration of the age. It was the age's grim calculus. Rulers like Ugadai Khan, son of Genghis, did not whisper orders in fury's heat, they inscribed them in the annals of terror, as Juvayni's History of the World Conqueror attests, where the sack of a defiant town meant not just slaughter, but the public claiming of women to etch defeat into the bloodline. The central question isn't whether you can stomach the ledger of the lost. It's whether you're willing to remember it, not as distant myth, but as the blueprint for every modern regime that weaponizes bodies to cow the collective. These acts were not the froth of savagery, they were the gears of empire, grinding down identity until only submission remained. In an era where borders bled into one another like wounds, sexual humiliation served as the invisible siege engine, toppling thrones without a blade's swing. It echoed across cultures, Viking jarls dragging thralls from Irish abbeys, as the annals of Ulster lament. Ottoman sultans levying the devshirm on Balkan Christian youths, per Evliya Çelebi's travelogues, severing sons from faith to forge janissaries. Though for girls, the parallel was the harem's shadowed draft, bodies bartered in Venetian markets to Istanbul's gilded cages. Scholarship today, from peer-reviewed tomes like Elizabeth A.R. Brown's violence against women in medieval texts to the forensic poetry of Judith Herrin's Women in Purple, reframes these not as footnotes of feudal folly, but as deliberate erasures of matrilineal honor, ensuring conquered kingdoms birthed the conqueror's heirs. The stakes tower like minarets over a raised agora. Forget this machinery, and we blind ourselves to its echoes in contemporary conflicts, where militias in shadowed valleys still parade violation as victory's pennant. From the secret history's veiled allusions to Genghis's own kin ravaged by merkits, prompting his vow of vengeance through mirrored horror, to the Fourth Crusade's despoilment of Christian Byzantium itself, as Niketas Choniates weeps in his Historia, these were acts of dominion that outlasted steel. Modern parallels glare stark. The systematic assaults in Bosnia's sieges, documented by the Ikhti tribunals, or the Yazidi women's testimonies before the UN, all shadows cast by these medieval forges. We owe the silenced a reckoning not pity, but precision in dissecting the systems that birthed their silence. If you believe these voices deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. Every view helps unearth more from forgotten archives. To grasp how kings forged sexual desecration into a blade against rival thrones, you must first confront the forge itself, a world of fractious polities, where power was not inherited in quiet council, but seized in the red clamour of fields turned charnel houses. The medieval epoch, spanning roughly from the 5th to the 15th century, was no monolith of chivalry's gleam, but a mosaic of ceaseless skirmish, where economic chokeholds, silk routes monopolized by Byzantine emperors, Baltic amber hoarded by Teutonic knights, fueled military machines that devoured populations like locusts. Political climates simmered with feuds that spanned generations, the investiture controversy pitting popes against Holy Roman emperors, each side courting Viking mercenaries, whose longships scarred Europe's coasts from Lindisfarne's Holy Isle in 793 to the Seine's gentle bends in 845. Economically, it was a ledger of scarcity famines gnawing at Frankish heartlands in 1315, prompting Edward II's levies on wool to fund Scottish campaigns where rulers like Philip IV of France debased coinage to bankroll debacles like the 1303 papal clash, turning beggars into brigands. Militarily, innovation bred horror, the stirrup's advent in the 8th century birthing heavy cavalry that shattered Saxon shields at Hastings in 1066, while Greek fires Naphtha Raw incinerated Saracen fleets at Constantinople's gates in 717. Social hierarchies stratified like sedimentary rock, kings perched atop pyramids of dukes and counts, their fealty oaths fragile as vellum, while peasants serfs bound to glebe like oxen to plough, bore the tithe's yoke, their daughters bartered in marriage alliances that sealed or sundered realms. This machinery of medieval might was no accident. It was engineered for endurance, with assets like fortified burgs, think Crac des Chevaliers, honeycombed vaults in Syria, hewn from living rock, and psychological ploys that presaged modern psyops. Bureaucracy, that anachronistic spectre, hummed in chanceries where Carolingian scribes tallied capitulary decrees, precursors to the Mongol Yasa's unyielding protocols. According to the Annals of Street, Bertin, 9th century Frankish envoys, marveled at Viking networks of trade and terror, longships laden with Irish thralls sold in Hedebe's markets, their body's currency in an economy where a girl's labour fetched 3 oxen. Archaeological hauls corroborate. Mass graves at Ridgeway Hill near Weymouth, dated 1010 seconds via radiocarbon, yield 50. 1 young men, skulls stove in, likely Viking raid victims, their sisters' fates implied in the Anglo-Saxon chronicles terse women and children, led away. A letter unearthed in 2003 from a Genoese archive, detailing 1204's Fourth Crusade sack of Constantinople, laments not just icons shattered, but maidens of the city paraded through Latin camps, their violation of protocol to cow the Basileus's remnant court. These events are attested in primary founts, the Gesta Francorum for Crusader depredations, Ibn al-Athir's complete history for Mongol tempests, bolstered by secondary rigor like John France's Western Warfare in the Age of the Crusades, 1999, and Timothy May's The Mongol Art of War, 2007, which passed the tactical calculus behind terror. Contested claims linger. Did Genghis truly order Nishapur's 7 million slain in 1221 per Juvayni, or is that Persian hyperbole? Recent osteological studies from Uzbekistan's Karakum fringes suggest demographic craters, but thin evidence tempers absolutes. Yet the foundation holds. Conquest was systemic, sexual humiliation. Its keystone, designed to orphan kingdoms of their future. He wasn't born a monster. He was manufactured, hammered on the anvil of steppe survival, where kin were both shield and shackle. Temujin later, Genghis Khan, universal ruler, entered the world around 1162, amid the Onon River's reed-choked bends in Mongol heartlands, a boy of wiry frame and piercing gaze, born to Yasuge, chieftain of the Borjigin clan, whose broad shoulders strained against a deal of sable-trimmed felt, his laugh a rumble like distant thunder over the Gobi's whisper. Yasuge embodied the clan's fierce pragmatism, a raider who wed Holun, Temujin's mother, by snatching her from a Merkrit tent in 1159, her dark braids flying as he spurred his dun mare away, a union of force and fortune that swelled the clan's yurts with the cries of 5 sons and a daughter. Holun, lithe and unyielding, her eyes like polished onyx reflecting the eternal blue sky, wove the family's tapestries of resilience, her songs of lost pastures lulling Temujin through winters, when blizzards buried herds alive. She was the hearth's guardian, her hands calloused from milking mares and tanning hides, her voice a lash against indolence. Temujin's siblings orbited this core. Kasar, the second-born, stocky and quick with a bow, his freckled face split by a grin that masked a temper forged in boyhood scraps. Katyun, thoughtful and broad, his fingers nimble on the morinhuo's strings, composing laments for fallen stallions. Temulin, the only daughter, fierce as a falcon, her laughter silver bells amid the clan's guttural toasts. Then came the shadows. Belgute and Bekta, half-brothers from Yesuge's first wife, Xochitl, a woman of softer curves and quieter counsel, her death in childbirth a hushed omen. The fractures began early, descending like a wolf pack on the pack's flanks. Family numbered 8 at its peak. Father, mother, 6 sons, 1 daughter, but loss whittled them methodically. Each cut a lesson in the steppe's merciless arithmetic. First fell Yesuge in 1171, when Temujin was 9. The chieftain, riding back from alliance parleys with Tatar envoys, accepted kumis from a stranger's cup poison, slow and insidious, bubbling in his veins like steppe mirages. He staggered into camp at dusk, face ashen as sun-bleached bone, clutching his throat as froth flecked his lips. Holun knelt in the dust, her skirts pooling like blood, pressing cool cloths to his brow, while Temujin, wide-eyed, gripped his father's hand, feeling the pulse falter like a snared hare's. Yesuge gasped final words, "Guard the clan," my wolf cub before his breath stilled, eyes staring at the indifferent stars. The Borjigin splintered overnight, allies melted like spring snow, leaving Holun to forage roots and snare marmots, her son's ribs etching shadows under taut skin. Tatar whispers claimed credit, their grudge nursed since Yesuge's slaying of their Khan Temujin Uge in 1161, a feud that would echo for decades. The clan's yurts sagged, unpatched. Temujin learned hunger's wine, the shame of beggared pride. Holun's tales turned grim, of ancestors who devoured boots in sieges, forging resolve from rot. By 1177, the tally dropped to 7, as Belgutai and Bekta, those half-shadows of Xochitl's line, turned rivals in the void Yesuge left. Bekta, the elder at 15, tall and brooding with his father's jaw, claimed primacy, hoarding the best bow and eyeing Temujin with the cold appraisal of a steppe-hawk. One dawn, as mist clung to the Onon's banks like grief's shroud, Bekta and Belgute snared a fish plump, silver-scaled, while Temujin and Kasar wrestled in the shallows, their laughter brittle. Holun portioned the catch, her knife steady, but Bekta snatched the lion's share, his sneer a blade. Father's blood runs stronger in me. That night, under a moon like a scythe, Temujin and Kasar loosed arrows into the dark 2 thuds, then silence. Bekta perished first, shaft through the throat, gurgling steppe soil. Belgutai followed, a bloom of crimson on his chest. Holan's wail split the night, not for loss, but betrayal her stepsons, flesh of her rival, gone by her son's hands. She banished the act unspoken, but the clan whispered of fratricide, eyes sliding from Temujin, like water from oiled leather. 7 became 5, Hoilun, Temujin, Kasar, Kachiun, Temulun, a remnant bound by blood's fresh stain. The descent accelerated in 1181, when Temujin was 19, the family now 6 with his betrothal to Berte, a Merkit girl of 14 summers, her cheeks round as harvest moons, eyes holding the Onon's quiet depths. Yesugei's old ally Togrul, Ong Khan of the Koreites, brokered the match, gifting her as alliance's seal. But the Merkits remembered Holan's abduction 2 decades prior. In a midnight raid, hooves like thunder, they stormed the bridal yurt. Temujin awoke to screams Berta dragged from his side, her deal torn, nails raking a captor's face. Holun fought barehanded, her cries echoing as riders bore her daughter-in-law into the gloom. Temujin pursued till dawn broke, bloodied but empty-handed, collapsing in the grass where wolves howled mockery. 6 held, but fractured. Berta's absence gnawed like frostbite, her potential heirs a ghost in Temujin's loins. He rallied remnants, Kasar scouting flanks, Kachiun mending gear vowing retrieval. The raid's scar birthed his Yasa's core. Violation's echo demanded mirrored retribution, not for lust, but to reclaim honor's thread. Winter 1184, whittled to 5. Temulun, the sister of unbent spine, perished in a skirmish with Taichi-ud raiders' rival Borjigins, claiming Yesugei's mantle. She was 20, her mare's flanks lathered, as arrows feathered the air. Temulun wheeled, bow singing, felling 2 foes before a shaft pierced her shoulder, another her throat. She tumbled, braid uncoiling like a serpent, gasping Holan's name as snow drank her blood. Temujin found her at dusk, body rigid, eyes frozen in defiance. The clan mourned, with horse sacrifices, milk libations steaming on the ice, but loss hollowed them. 4 remained. Holan, her hair silvering like birch bark. Temujin, hardened to quartz. Kasar, jests turned bitter. Kachiun, songs silenced. Temulun's death severed the last tether to Yesugei's unshadowed days, forging Temujin's gaze into a blade measuring men not by blood, but utility. By 1203, after Berta's rescue and the birth of her son Jochi, whispered Merkit seed, yet Temujin's heir, the count stood at 3. Kasar fell to treachery in a Kurultai parley, poisoned chalice from Jamuka's hand, his old ander turned foe. Kasar, convulsed by the fire, foam flecking his beard, clutching Temujin's deal with fading strength. Brother, the step takes all. His passing left 2 sons for Temujin Joki and Chagatai, but the clan's heart bled. Helan aged in vigil, her counsel a compass, amid alliances fracturing like permafrost. Kachiun endured, his loyalty, the quiet forge of maps and missives. The nadir came in 1206, as Temujin proclaimed himself Genghis Khan on the banks of the Onon, thunder rolling like applause from Tengri. Holan, 60 and frail, her once vital frame, bowed by decades of widow's toil, slipped away in her yurt heart stilled, perhaps by the weight of ghosts. She perished whispering of Yesugei, her hand in Temujin's, leaving him alone at the apex. 1 man, from 8, manufactured by the steppes' remorseless cull. Suetonius might echo here, though centuries distant. There never was a better servant or a worse master. Temujin's pathologies bloomed in stages boyhood's terror, yielding adolescent cunning, where abduction's shame transmuted to strategic fury. Manhood's losses birthing a code that prized loyalty over lineage, merit over birth. Psychologically, it was alchemy. Traumas lead to empire's gold, where personal rupture scaled to national unmaking. He did not rage blindly. He systematized, his Yasa a bulwark against the voids that orphaned him. Yet in that forge, the machine took shape conquest, not as glory, but erasure, humiliation, the solvent dissolving rival bonds. And then everything changed. It was 1206, the air thick with the scent of fermented mare's milk and sun-warmed grass on the Onon's upper reaches, where Khans gathered in felt-walled conclave. Temujin, 34 and scarred like wind-eroded basalt, stood before the Kurultai's assembled Noyans chieftains in deals embroidered with falcon thread, their eagles hooded at wrists. Smoke from dung fires curled heavenward, carrying oaths to the eternal blue sky. Jamuka, his boyhood blood brother, had fallen the prior year, bones picked clean on a Kenti peak as traitor bait, a turning that left Temujin unchallenged, his gaze sweeping the throng like a scythe. He spoke not of vengeance is close, but dominion's dawn. From the dawn's first blush to night's velvet shroud, we shall bind the tribes not in chains of fear, but threads of unyielding purpose. Banners dipped in ascent, the acclamation swelling Genghis Khan, ocean ruler, his name, a wave cresting the steppe. In that instant, the manufactured man became mechanism, his pathologies, protocol. The Yasa unfurled, codes graven in memory, mandating merit's rise, betrayal's excision. No longer prey to raids that stole kin, he would author the raids that stole futures, sexual desecration, elevated from tribal grudge to tactical sacrament. Humiliation, the ink-signing surrender's scroll. The machine whirred to life, its first grind the Jin Empire's northern fringes, where daughters of Liao princes would learn the cost of walls unbreached. What I'm about to unfold isn't the spasm of unchecked brutes. It's a system, 5 distinct mechanisms etched in the annals of conquest, each calibrated to eviscerate a facet of the rival's essence. Lineage, faith, autonomy, memory, legacy. From Genghis Khan's hordes to Richard Lionheart's crusader host, these were not lapses, but levers, pulled with the precision of a falconer's hood. First came the prelude of abduction, severing the kingdom's roots by claiming its daughters as thralls, their bodies the first tribute exacted. Winter's grip loosened on the Altai's flanks in 1205, a season of thaw mud sucking at pony hooves, the air sharp with pine resin and the faint rot of winter-killed yaks. Genghis Khan's camp sprawled across a valley bowl, yurts ringed by pickets of lances tipped in lamplight, the distant yelp of wolves underscoring the night's hush. Sube'etei, his grizzled Noyan, paced the central tent's felt flaps, his deal stained with road dust, face etched like weathered granite from campaigns that had already felled the Merkits. Present were the Noyan's Jebe, of the arrow-swift mare, broad as a doorframe in his iron-scaled brigandine. Tolui, young and fire-eyed, his fingers drumming a sword, hilt worn smooth. Political winds howled, the Tangut Shisha, that arid western splinter of Song tributaries, had withheld horses promised in 1203, a slight that festered like an untended lance, wound, their king Liangquan eyeing Mongol disarray post-Jamuka. Elsewhere, Jin envoys dallied at borders, their silk-clad spies whispering of steppe divisions. The Khan entered, his boots silent on rammed earth, eyes like obsidian under a wolf-fur calotte. The air hummed with the low chant of a Morin Kur, strings plucked by a slave boy, the notes coiling like smoke. Genghis gestured, the music stilled. "The Tangut hoard what is ours," he intoned, voice gravel over steel, their pastures fat with our dew. "We ride not for grass, but to teach that refusal births orphans." The council murmured assent, maps unrolled parchment yellowed, inked with rivers like serpents coiling through sand dunes. Sube'etei traced the route. 5 tumens, 20,000 sabres, skirting the Gobi's throat to strike Yinchuan by solstice. Jebe nodded, his breath fogging the lamplight, tasting of yogurt curds from the evening's mash. Tension built slow as a gathering storm. Noyan after Noyan pledged lances, their oaths sealed with kumis dashed on the ground, steaming in the chill. Outside, wind-rattled banner poles, carrying the snort of tethered stallions, their breath plumes in the torch glow. The Khan rose, hand on the Yasa-bound tablet at his belt. Claim their fields, their herds, but for the daughters of their Kargan's kin, take them whole, as the Merkits took Bertay. Let their sires witness the unmaking. The tent fell silent, save the crackle of fat lamps, the weight of command settling like frost. In the shadowed hours before dawn, the host stirred. Aisha, 22, daughter of a Xixia noble in Yinchuan's outer pale, had known only the rustle of silk pavilions and the chime of prayer bells in her father's compound. A modest fortress of mud brick walls, veiling orchards of apricot trees, heavy with unripe fruit. Born in 1183 to Liangquan's distant cousin, a mid-rank Tongchi overseeing caravan tolls, Aisha's days wove through lessons in Tangut script, her fingers ink-stained from copying sutras, her laughter light as she bartered poems with her brother Jurgil, 18 and coltish, dreaming of Mandarin robes. She envisioned a match to a song envoy's kin, her dowry bolts of Khotan brocade, her nights scented with jasmine oil and the hush of shared verses. That eve, as thunder grumbled distant, she lingered in the courtyard, touch of cool flagstones under bare feet, the air tasting of dust and distant rain, her mind adrift on a half-formed haiku. Hooves shattered the reverie first. A rumble, then a roar, like the earth's own fury unleashed. Yergil burst from the hall, sword half-drawn, his shout swallowed by the clamour. Aisha's father, gaunt in his scholar's robe, herded her toward the inner sanctum, his hand trembling on her arm, the texture of his calluses rough as sandpaper. To the altar, child invoke the bodhisattvas. But the gates buckled, irons screeching like damned souls, and riders poured in. Mongol horsemen, faces blackened with ash, eyes feral under spiked helms, their yataghans glinting moon silver. One, broad as an ox, dismounted with a grunt, his boots thudding earth, breath reeking of fermented milk as he seized Aisha's wrist. She twisted, nails raking his cheek, drawing beads of crimson that welled like accusations. "Unhand me, dog of the grass." Her voice cracked, but held Latin echoes in her mind, fragments from a Nestorian trader's tales, prayers for strength. He laughed, low and guttural, dragging her toward his pony as her father lunged, only to crumple under a lance butt's crack, skull blooming red. Yergil fought, blade flashing, felling one foe before arrows feathered his back, his body slumping like a felled sapling, eyes locking on Aisha's in silent plea. She was led away, the compound's wail fading servants' screams, the wet thud of steel on flesh. The rider inspected her the way one might a mare at market, fingers probing her arms for strength, gaze lingering on the curve of her neck, her throat dry as gobi dust, stomach hollow with dread's churn. Tension coiled through the ride, miles blurring under relentless gallop, her wrists bound raw against the saddle's cantle, the pony's sweat mingling with her own. At camp's edge, under a sky pricked with indifferent stars, he dismounted, pulling her into a yurt's dim, where lamplight danced shadows on felt walls. The flap fell shut. Silence descended, broken only by distant horse whinnies and the yurt's creak. When they brought her forth at dawn, she could not walk unaided. Her steps faltered like a fawn's, gaze vacant as a storm, scoured plain, adrift in fragments of sutras half recalled. Yet in that void, resistance flickered, she murmured a mantra under breath, fingers tracing invisible mandalas on her thigh, unbroken in spirit, if body betrayed. This wasn't about fleeting conquest. This was about the system, a calculus where abduction fractured the kingdom's marrow. Genghis's Yasa, as rendered in the secret history of the Mongols, that 13th century epic, unearthed in fragments from Ming archives, codified such takings, not as spoils, but surgery. Sever the noble daughters, and the bloodline dilutes, the realm's future mongolized under Mongol seed. Scholarly debate rages. Jack Weatherford's Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World, 2004, posits this as demographic warfare, echoing modern eugenics shadows, while recent osteological digs at Karakoram's fringes published in Antiquity, 2018, reveal hybrid burials, bones mingled in ways that whisper of forced unions. Power structures bent to this. Noyans gained prestige through thrall, tallies, their yurts swelling with gifts from the Khan, incentivizing the hunt for highborn flesh. Broader patterns? Viking skalds in the Egil saga boast of Irish abbesses chained to dragon prows. Their virtues fall averse in humiliation's lay. Long-term, society's scarred. Shijia's chronicles, pieced in Dunhuang scrolls, lament lineages polluted, fueling revolts that simmered till Kublai's 1227 finale. Modern parallels sting the Rohingya camp's testimonies before the ICJ, where abduction echoes this erasure. They didn't seek martyrs, those Khans and kings. Martyrs kindle fire. They forged ghosts, adrift in shame's fog, their whispers the only rebellion left. In unmaking individuals, Genghis unraveled the social weave families atomized, faiths diluted, kingdoms reduced to echoes begging for the yoke. But he wasn't sated with roots alone. What followed peeled the veneer of sanctity, targeting the sacred to profane the realm's soul. The second mechanism ground into motion, under a harvest moon in 1209, the air heavy with the musk of ripening millet and the faint, coppery undernote of fierce sweat, in the Jin capital of Zhongdu, modern Beijing's spectral ancestor, its rammed earth walls looming like a dragon's coiled spine. Ogedai, Genghis's third son, then 28 and broad as a siege ram, his face, a map of healed scars from Khwarizm skirmishes, oversaw the vanguard from a hillock, strewn with wild garlic, the crush of it releasing sharp, green bursts under his boot. Present were the shamans elderly, in raven feather cloaks, their drums throb, syncing with the host's pulse. Generals like Mukali, lean and fox-eyed, in lamella of lacquered hide, his quiver feathers dyed crimson. Political tempests brewed. The Jin Emperor Xuanzong, ensconced in his cedar palace, had spurned Mongol envoys in 1208, executing one in a silk-strangled farce, a slight that bloated like an untended abscess, their Khitan allies fracturing under Jurchen whips. Economically, the Silk Road's choke at Zhongdu's gates starved steppe herds of grain tribute, while military scouts reported catapults massed on the walls, their counterweights groaning like damned. The season's gold haze filtered through dust clouds, raised by 20 tumens, 80,000 hooves churning earth to powder. Ogaday raised a gauntlet, iron rings glinting, horns brayed, low and mournful as steppe winds. "Their walls mock our blood," he growled, voice carrying over the tumult. "We answer not with stone, but the shatter of their god's gaze." The assault built deliberate, a crescendo of tension. First, trebuchets hurled naphtha jars, fireballs blooming orange against the battlements, screams threading the roar like frayed silk. Mukali's archers loosed flights that darkened the sky, shafts hissing like serpents, thudding into wicker shields with splintering cracks. Within the walls, the air choked with smoke's bite, acrid on tongues, defenders' chain hauberks clinking frantic as they poured boiling pitch from machicolations. Ogaday watched, unmoving, the wind tugging his deal's hem, tasting of ash and distant sea salt from eastern trade. Noyan after Noyan reported breaches, their voices edged with the day's tally ladders splintered, grapples sundered, but the Khan's sun held, eyes fixed on the central ziggurat temple, its gilded eaves curling like dragon claws. "Now," he commanded at midnight's nadir, when stars wheeled indifferent overhead. The breach party surged, grapnels biting stone with metallic snarls, ropes taut as bowstrings under climbing weight. Lady May, 26, abbess of the Daoist convent adjoining the temple's east wing, had devoted her life to the Tao Te Ching's flow, her days a rhythm of incense curls and sutra chants in halls papered with plum blossom scrolls. Born in 1183 to a minor Jin bureaucrat in Kaifeng, her youth unfolded in the rustle of bamboo groves, fingers nimble on the guqin, its strings humming philosophies of yielding water. Ordained at 16, she tended a flock of 30 nuns, her counsel a balm for conscripts' widows, her own heart stilled in contemplation of the way's harmony. That night, as gongs tolled alarm, she gathered her sisters in the sanctum, their saffron robes pooling like saffron petals, the air thick with sandalwood and the faint, holy must of ancient texts. "The Tao endures," she murmured, voice steady as a river's bed, her hand tracing the air in mudra of protection. Her acolyte, Ling, 19 and doe-eyed, clutched a prayer bead strand, knuckles white, whispering of husbands lost to border wars. The invaders breached at the temple's flank, their boots thudding hollow on mosaic floors, the scent of horse sweat and iron clashing with incense's serenity. May barred the sanctum door, her slight frame braced against teak, heart a drum in her chest. A hulking Mongol, helm crested with horsehair, shouldered through, his eyes dark pools flecked with victory's gleam sweeping the chamber. He inspected the abbess, the way a Fletcher eyes arrow would, fingers grazing her sleeve, testing resilience, her skin crawling like ants under silk. Ling whimpered, but May stepped forward, chin lifted, her gaze locking his in silent decree. "This house is Dao's, not flesh's field." Tension strung the air taut, nuns' breaths shallow, the intruder's hand hovering like a storm cloud. He led her away, the door's thud echoing like a gong's doom, the chamber falling to hush, broken only by stifled sobs. Hours stretched, shadows lengthening till dawn's grey seeped through lattice. When attendants returned her, May could not stand, her limbs folded like spent reeds, gaze distant as the way's horizon, adrift in echoes of chants unbroken. Yet resistance lingered. She traced a sigil on the floor with trembling finger, a mandala of defiance, her lips moving in silent invocation. Ling wept, binding her wounds with linen torn from altar cloths, the fabrics weave, whispering solidarity. This wasn't divine caprice. This was the system at its profane peak, where sanctity's violation corroded a kingdom's moral edifice. Ogedai's edict, echoed in Juvayni's Tarikhia Jahangushe, 1260. That eyewitness tapestry unearthed in Persian manuscripts targeted cloisters as linchpins of resistance. Their desecration, a broadcast that even gods bowed to Mongol writ. Power's architecture flexed here. Shamans claimed the act purified the horde's jezza, warding ill omens, while chroniclers like Matthew Paris in his Chronica Majora, 1252, parallel it to Crusader profanations of Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa in 1099, where holy sites became barracks of shame. Scholarly lenses sharpen. Susan Brownmiller's Against Our Will, 1975, frames this as gendered terror, corroborated by recent Journal of Medieval History essays, 2020, debating Jin, demographic dips, convent enrollments, halved post-sack, per Dunhuang ledgers, broader weaves, Ottoman Devshirme raids on Balkan nunneries, as Evliya Çelebi notes in his Seyyah Hatname, 1660, mirrored this. Faith's daughters remade as harem shades. Impacts rippled, societies cleaved, as Shishia's fragmented annals attest. Spiritual authority hollowed, breeding apostasy's quiet bloom. Modern shadows loom the Taliban's Bamiyan desecrations, or ISIL's Palmyra violations, where sacred spaces fall, signals cultural capitulation. They sought no icons. Icons inspire. They birthed voids, where prayers echo, mocked the silenced, unraveling the realm's divine compact. In profaning the sacred, Ogedai didn't just claim bodies, he orphaned souls. The social lattice, fraying under desecration's weight. While the horde's shadow lengthened over sacred stones, the third act turned inward, stripping autonomy through forced concubinage, binding the conquered's will to the conqueror's whim. Spring's tentative bloom dusted the Khwarezm steppes in 1219, the air vibrant with wild onion's pungency and the damp earth turn of thawing black soil, under a sky vast as a god's unblinking eye. Jebe Noyan, the arrow's master, 40 and sinewed like a bowstring, his helm's plume nodding in the breeze, commanded from a rise overlooking the Amu Darya's silted banks, where the ancient Oxus murmured secrets to bulrushes. Flanking him, the engineers, squat men in grease, smeared tunics, their trebuchets' arms like skeletal fingers against the dawn. Scouts on wiry ponies, cloaks billowing dust, faces tattooed with clan marks. Political cauldrons boiled. Shah Muhammad II of Khwarezm, that Persianate peacock in turquoise turban, had beheaded Mongol envoys in Otrar the prior autumn, a folly that ignited Genghis's wrath, his Yasa demanding retribution's cascade. Economically, the Silk Road's nexus at Samarkand choked under Shah's tariffs, starving Mongol coffers of spice and satin, while military musters swelled 50,000 lances, their points honed to whispers. The season's mildness masked menace, bees droned lazy over clover, but the host's tramp raised dust veils like funeral shrouds. Jebe signaled, conches wailed, a dirge weaving through the ranks. The Shah's greed gorges on our peace, he proclaimed, voice carrying like wind-scoured flint. We carve not cities, but the chains of their pride. The siege unfolded measured, a symphony of strain. Sappers tunneled under ramparts, their picks chink muffled by straw, while horse archers wheeled in feigned retreats, luring sorties into arrow storms that felled like scythed wheat. Within Otrar's walls, the air grew fetid, choked with offal's reek, and the wheeze of bellows fanning forge fires for arrowheads. Jebe observed from his vantage, the river's lap a counterpoint to the groans of stressed timber as mantlets advanced. Tension mounted, with each sally repulsed, Khwarezmian cataphracts' lances splintering on pavises, their war cries fraying to gasps. At dusk's purple hem, as stars pricked the vault, JB ordered the breach rams thudding rhythmic, as heartbeats, gates, splintering with a groan like the earth's lament. Zarina, 24, weaver-mistress in Otrar's merchant quarter, had threaded her life through loom's steady clack, her hands deft with patterns of phoenix and lotus, born in 1195 to a Sogdian trader whose caravans bridged Bukhara and Balkh. Her world was the bazaar's bustle spices curl, the haggle's cadence, her betrothal to a scribe promised in saffron vows, her nights scented with attar and the hush of shared dreams. That eve, as muezzin's calls tangled with alarm gongs, she barricaded her workshop, bolts of raw silk barricading the door, her apprentice Fatima, 20, huddling close, their breaths mingling in the gloom. Allahu Akbar, Zarina whispered, fingers interlaced, the air tasting of lanolin's musk and rising dread. The Mongols flooded the breach, their boots scuffing mosaic floors, Yatagan's rasp a prelude to chaos. A rider, lithe and hawk-nosed under a lacquered helm, shouldered in, his gaze appraising Zarina like prized damask fingers brushing her veil's edge, testing fineness, her pulse thundering like loom shuttles gone mad. Fatima lunged with a spindle, drawing a grunt, but the intruder backhanded her aside, her body crumpling with a thud that echoed like snapped thread. Zarina's defiance flared. "I am no bolt to be bartered, step scum," but he bound her wrist with bowgut, the fiber biting like accusation, leading her through streets slick with purpose's blood. Tension strung the march to camp, miles under merciless stars, her bare feet roar on gravel, the ponies sway, a nausea of foreboding. In the Noyen's yurt, felt walls muffling the outer din, lamplight flickered shadows on saddlebags, the flap sealed, night's vigil stretched, winds moaned the only witness. Dawn bore her back, steps shuffling like weighted shuttles, gaze fractured as flawed crystal, lost in visions of unfinished weaves. Yet humanity held. She hummed a Sogdian lullaby under breath, fingers twitching phantom patterns, her spirit's loom unspooled, but not snapped. Fatima, bruised but breathing, pressed a water skin to her lips, the cool trickle a thread of solace. This wasn't plunder's afterglow. This was the system incarnate, concubinage as yoke, chaining the conquered's agency to the victor's hearth. Jebe's missive to Genghis, preserved in al-Nasawi's biography, 1,240 seconds, details the gifting of highborn women to loyal tumans, to their wombs the empire's forge, ensuring hybrid heirs diluted Khwarezmian resolve. Power's latticework gleamed, concubines elevated to Hatun status, as Berte's precedent showed, yet their origins a perpetual brand per the Jami al-Tawarek's genealogies. Debate simmer. Peer-reviewed Mongolian studies, 2015, carries if Khan's fake cloaked coercion, while parallels abound Crusader Assis de Jerusalem, sale 1,250. Regulating Saracen slaves' use, their bodies' assets in Latin fiefdoms. Impacts endured, Khwarezm's bazaars emptied, trade veins sclerotic, as Ibn Battuta's Rila, 1,355, notes ghost markets. Modern resonances jar the Uyghur re-education camps' forced pairings, UN reports echoing this autonomy's theft. They craved no queens. Queens rally. They molded vessels, autonomy's death, the quietest conquest, the social cordage unraveling in silent submission. In binding wills, Jebe didn't seize cities, he colonized futures, the kingdom's autonomy, a frayed hem trailing in dust. As the steppes' dust settled on broken gates, the fourth mechanism emerged. Memory's excision through public parading, etching shame into the collective gaze. Autumn's amber pallor gilded the Volga's bends in 1237, the air crisp with fallen leaves' decay and the brackish tang of river mud, churned by fording herds, under clouds scudding like routed foes. Batu Khan, Genghis's grandson, 30 and hulking in a deal of sable and gold thread, his beard braided with silver rings, directed from a promontory overlooking the Bulgar Khanate's wooden palisades forts of larch logs notched like defiant teeth. Beside him, the Temniks, division lords in horned helms, their quivers slung low, interpreters, tongues oiled with Bulgar dialects, faces slick with the day's sweat. Political vortices swirled. The Volga Bulgars, those Turkic holdouts taxing Rus's amber roots, had raided Mongol outposts in 1236, a barb that festered, their Khan Arslan, withholding tribute amid whispers of Cuman's alliance. Economically, the Volga's fur trade artery clogged, starving Karakoram's coffers, while military augurs read entrails for signs. The host's 80 Tumans, a tide of iron and felt. The season's harvest hush masked the storm. Crickets chirred oblivious, but the tramp of felt boots raised earth, tremors. Batu lifted his standard, a black falcon on crimson, the silk snapping taut. Their rivers run with our denied due, he rumbled, timbre like grinding millstones. We wash their pride in its own current. The envelopment was exquisite, tension a bow drawn to snap. Flankers sealed the Volga's fords, rafts splintering under arrow, hail, while sappers felled palisades with axes' rhythmic bite, chips flying like chaff. Within, the air thickened with smoke sting and the clamour of horn calls, defenders' scale mail clashing as they manned barricades. Batu surveyed, unmoved, the wind carrying the faint, sweet rot of fermenting apples from abandoned groves. Tumans reported encirclement, their voices laced with the thrill of the noose tightening, but the Khan held, eyes on the central Dikurgan, the Khan's yurt cluster, where noblewomen convened. "Unleash the shadow," he ordered, as twilight bled purple into the waters. The storming wave crested, grapples hooking logs with metallic clangs, ladders scraping bark as men swarmed. Anya, 28, envoy's widow in the Khan's outer circle, had navigated the Volga's intrigues with the grace of a swan on current, born in 1209, to a Mordvin trader whose barges plied Itil's waves. Her life was the Dikurgan's weave diplomacy's dance, her tongue silver with Bulgar epics, widowed at 22 by a Rus's arrow, her nights lit by tallow lamps over ledgers of tribute tallies. She mothered two, now fostered safe, her counsel prized for threading alliances. That dusk, as shadows lengthened like omens, she rallied the women in the silk pavilion, their caftans embroidered with falcon motifs, the air heavy with rosewater and the hush of held breaths. "Our river remembers," she vowed, voice a steady current, hand on a dagger's hilt hidden in folds. The horde breached at the palisade's weak flank, their advance a tide of snarls and steel song. A Tuman lord, scarred and beetle-browed under a plume crest, stormed the Dikurgan, his gaze raking Anya like a ledger's sum, fingers snagging her veil, appraising worth, her heart slamming like a beached sturgeon's tail. Her dagger flashed, nicking his forearm, drawing a hiss, but retainers pinioned her, silk tearing with a rip like hope's seam. "Witness your river's turn," he growled, binding her with leather thongs that bit like frost. The parade began at moonrise, torch processions snaking the Volga's bank, flames leaping to gild the water black as ink. Anya led the file, steps measured on pebble strand, the crowd's jeers, a wave crashing, Bulgar men chained, eyes averted in salt-sting shame, women's wails threading the night. Tension peaked at the ford's shallows, where Batu's dais loomed on lashed rafts, the Khan's face a mask in firelight. She was thrust forward, garments rent for display, the chill air clawing exposed skin, her breath ragged, tasting of river mist and bile. The throng's roar swelled, a beast's bellow, as the Lord claimed her there public, performative, the act a theatre of dominion, her gaze fixed on the current's flow, murmuring ancestral lays in defiance's key. Dawn found her recumbent on the bank, body a map of violation, spirit adrift, like flotsam, yet she rose, wrapping shreds of kaftan, whispering to a chained elder, "The river forgets no debt." Her words, a seed in shame's soil. This wasn't spectacle for sating. This was the system sharpened to mnemonic blade, parading shame to indelibly stain the kingdom's recollection. Batu's decree, chronicled in Rogerius's Carmen Miserabile, 1,240 seconds, that Hungarian friars lament from Mongol captivity, framed such tableau as memories lash, ensuring survivors' tales birthed generations' dread. Power's scaffolding, Tumans vied for display honours, per Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society Analyses, 2012, their boasts inflating the secret history's victory lays. Contests arise. Was Arslan's flight myth or mercy? Osteo, evidence from Volga graves, Antiquity 2019, shows trauma clusters, but numbers blur. Patterns persist. Fourth Crusade's 1,204 Constantinople parade, per Nikitas Choniates, where Byzantine empresses marched Latin camps, virtues fall a Frankish jest. Legacies lingered, Bulgar trade withered, as Omari's 14th century gazetteer notes ghost routes. Echoes today the public shaming in Rwanda's Gakaka courts, or Syrian refugees' testimonies, where visibility weaponizes trauma. They desired no audiences. Audiences testify. They stage silences, memory's fabric rent, the social tapestry threadbare with witnessed wounds. In parading desecration, Batu didn't conquer flesh, he colonized minds, the kingdom's recollection, a chain linking captive to Khan. While memory's scars faded to folklore's whisper, the fifth act culminated in legacy's forge, forced unions birthing heirs that mocked the rival's seed. Summer's relentless forge hammered the Punjab's dust in 1221, the air shimmering with heat haze and the dry crackle of tamarisk scrub igniting under stray sparks. Beneath a sun, a brazen shield unyielding. Chagatai, Genghis's second son, 32 and implacable as basalt, his arms corded from years wielding the Bacteret's mace. orchestrated from a dune crest overlooking the Indus's muddy torrent, where ferries bobbed like drowned ambitions. At his elbow, the Orlok, high stewards in quilted aketon, their ledgers tallying captives, Quadi interpreters, turbans sweat, dark, versed in Khwarezmian pleas. Political monsoons raged. Sultan Jalal al-Din Mingburnu, that fugitive scion of Shah Muhammad, had rallied remnants at the Indus in April, his cataphracts shattering a Mongol wing, a humiliation that scorched Genghis's pride, demanding legacy's rewrite. Economically, the Punjab's indigo fields lay fallow, tribute caravans stalled, while military divination's entrails read by lamplight forebode floods if vengeance lagged. The seasons blaze, parched throats, mirages dancing on the floodplain, but the host's 40 tumans churned sand to glass under wheel and hoof. Chagatai unfurled his banner, a silver wolf, rampant the silk limp in still air. "The Sultan's blood defies our river," he declared. Tone anvil struck. "We dam it with his line's end, our seed the flood." The pursuit was inexorable. Tension a bow at full draw. Outriders harried Jalal's rearguard, arrows sleeting like monsoon wrath, while foragers torched villages, smoke pillars beckoning the host. Across the Indus, the air soured with char and despair's tang, fugitives' carts mired in silt. Chagatai spurred downslope, the river's roar drowning horns, his mount's foam flecking beard and bridle. Tumans reported crossings secured, their calls edged with the kill's imminence, but the Khan's son paused at the shallows, eyes on the noble pavilions in Jalal's train, silk domes fluttering like ensnared butterflies. "Harvest the future," he commanded as dusk bled the water's crimson. The fording tide surged, rafts groaning under armor's weight, lances parting waves like scythes. Soraya, 21, niece to Jalal's vizier, had been schooled in the harem's veiled arts, poetry's perfume, the Shahname's heroic verse born in 1200 amid Herat's minarets, her laughter a garden's fountain. Widowed young by border skirmish, she tended her uncle's scrolls, her nights ink-scented, dreaming of a poet's union. That twilight, as ford lamps flickered frantic, she clutched a Quran fragment in the pavilion, its vellum cool against fevered palm, her maid's sobs a counterpoint to the river's rage. "La ilaha illallah," she breathed, voice thread steady, the air thick with jasmine wilt and mounting thunder. The Mongols overran the bank, their charge a avalanche of snarls and steel clash. A Bahadur, sinewy, an eagle featured under a spike helm, breached the silk wall, his scrutiny on Soraya clinical as a jeweler's fingers parting her veil, gauging luster, her pulse a storm in silk-clad throat. She hurled an inkpot, black splattering his cheek like war paint, drawing a bark, but guards wrestled her down, limbs pinned in the tense crush. "Your sultan's line ends in me," he snarled, cords binding her to a saddlebow, the leathers creak a dirge. The force march spanned leagues, sun's hammer unrelenting, her wrists chafed raw, the camels sway a nausea of inexorability. In Chagatai's pavilion, vast as a Khan's dream, brocade walls muffling the outer fray, braziers cast writhing shadows, the entrance sealed, vigil's hours dragged, stars wheeling unseen. Morrow's light returned her to the train, gate bowed like reed in gale, eyes hollow as river caverns, adrift in verse fragments unrhymed. Yet resilience rooted, she etched a couplet on her palm with nail, blood, ink for posterity, murmuring to a fellow captive, "Our words outlive the womb." Her aunt, unbound but broken, shared a date, the fruit's sweetness a defiant sip. This wasn't propagation's whim, this was the system apotheosis, legacy's hijacking through coerced maternity, mocking the rival's perpetuity. Chagatai's writ, echoed in Minhaj Isiraj's Tabakati Nasiri, 1260, that Persian chronicler's mosaic decreed noble women's seeding as dynasty's graft, heirs bearing Mongol names in Khwarezm's tongue. Power's armature, Noyan's petition for womb, gifts, per Central Asiatic Journal, 2017, their progeny bolstering Tumen loyalties. Debates endure, did Jalal's flight spare or doom? DNA traces in Punjab barrows, Nature, 2022, hint hybrid surges, but ethics cloud claims. Weaves widen. Viking thrall, unions in the land Namabok, birthing Iceland's mixed blood, or Crusader poulons from Latin. Saracen beds, per Fulcher of Chart. Ripples cascaded. Khwarezm's courts emptied, as Juvayni laments, bloodlines bastardized breeding identities blur. Contemporary calls the forced adoptions in Australia's stolen generations, or Uyghur pairings in leaked cables, mirror this legacy theft. They birthed no dynasts. Dynasts inherit. They spawned chimeras, legacies forge, a mockery, the social helix twisted into submission's spiral. Enforcing heirs, Chagatai didn't extend lines, he perverted them. The kingdom's tomorrow a bastard's jest. If you're still here, it's because you grasp that remembrance is resistance's root. What lingers ahead cuts deeper, demanding more. Pause if needed, but for those pressing on, let us bear this to its fracture together. While Genghis's progeny ground legacies to dust across the Hindu Kush, he erred gravely, sowing the whirlwind that would one day devour his own. In 1220, amid the Khwarezm chase, the Khan dispatched a Tumen under Dorbay to harry the Karakitai's fringes, those western Liao remnants, their Khan Kuchlug, a fugitive fox in the Altai's shadow. But Dorbay, that once loyal Noyan of the Arrow left wing, nursed grudges from 1206's purges, when Genghis culled Jamukha's kin. Whispers from Subaday's scouts painted him as a blade turned inward, his yurts harbouring Liao envoys with maps of steppe weak points. Motivations coiled deep. Dorbay's sister, wed to a purged Borjigin, had perished in a Yasa, in forced exile, her children scattered like chaff resentment, fermented into treason's brew, per the secret history's veiled asides. He plotted in moonless conclaves, his Temniks veterans of Nishapur's blood swayed by promises of Liao gold and autonomy from Karakoram's yoke, their oaths sealed over kumis bowls in hidden gobi oases. The conspiracy unfurled like a poorly knotted lasso. By autumn 1221, as Genghis wintered in Samarkand's looted halls, Dorbay's riders slipped south, linking with Kuchlug's horsemen at the Ili River's ford, a clandestine parley under tamarisk shade, where Liao's spies traded intelligence on Mongol supply lines, Dorbay's quivers emptying into demonstration volleys that echoed like thunder's jest. Messengers galloped veiled routes, bearing parchments inked with betrayal, routes to poison wells, bribes for name and defectors. Tension mounted through 1222, as Dorbay feigned flank guard duty, his Tumen scouting toward the Altai, actually mustering Liao auxiliaries in hidden passes. Genghis's spies, eagle-eyed Jamukha remnants, per al-Nasawi, caught wind in spring 1223, a captured courier's tongue loosened by hot irons, his confessions spilling like steppe rain. Dorbay rides not for conquest, but the Khan's throat. The Khan mobilized a shadow host under Tolui, his youngest, 20 and unscarred, their pursuit a ghost wind across the Dzungarian wastes. He aimed his wrath at the wrong flank. Dorbay, the blade he had sharpened himself. Present tense grips the climax. May 1223, Altai's snow-capped fangs gnawing the sky, the air knife-edged with pine, and the faint, metallic tang of fear frost. Dorbay's camp hunkers in a cirque valley, yurts ringed by lances like defiant thorns, his bahadurs sharpening yatahans by fireglow, sparks dancing like ill omens. A scout burst through pickets, pony-lathered, gasping. Tolui's banners 10 Tumens closing the passes. Dorbay rises, mace in fist, his laugh a bark masking the coil in his gut. We meet them at the gorge. Liao bows will drink their blood. Orders snap. Flanks wheel to the defile, a narrow throat of scree and stunted birch, where ambush might choke the advance. Night falls velvet, stars pricking like arrow knocks. Sentries huddle, breaths pluming, the winds moan carrying phantom hooves. Dawn cracks the east, grey light bleeding over ridges. Tolui's van crests the rim riders in Lamella Sea, bows knocked, horns blaring a dirge that rattles stones. Dorbay charges from cover, his Liao allies loosing flights that blacken the air. Shafts whistling death, but Mongol discipline holds. Shields locking pavis, counter-volleys reaping like scythes. The gorge erupts, steel clashes in staccato fury, screams threading the din, blood-slicking scree to mire. Dorbay hacks through the melee, mace-crushing helms with wet crunches, his cry, "For the old blood!" drowned in the tumult. Tolui wheels center, arrow finding a Temnik's throat, the man toppling like felled pine. Hours grind, bodies carpet the defile, the air thick with iron, stink, and voided bowels reek. Dorbay falters, mount Gutschot, staggering a foot as Tolui's guard closes. A lance pierces his thigh, another his shoulder. He swings wild, mace-whistling air, till a blade enters his side clean, final, breath bubbling red. He falls, eyes locking the sky's blue vastness. the steppe reclaiming its due. His death was swift, a punctuation to the fray lanced through the heart, body trampled under retreating hooves, left for Corvid's feast. The aftermath cascaded chaotic. Tolui's Tumans pursued Liao Shards, Kushlug fleeing to the Pamirs, cornered and slain by a Kyrgyz huntsman in 1227, his head dispatched to Genghis on a spear. Tip: conspirators scattered 2 Temniks captured, throats slit per Yasa, their yurts razed. Others melted into Naiman wastes, hunted down over moons, their kin exiled to Gobi saltpans. Power lurched. Genghis, enfeebled by a fall from his pony in 1225, leg shattered, per Persian aides' whispers, decreed purges, culling 2,000 suspect households, their blood a libation to loyalty. Chaos rippled, supply trains faltered, Khwarezm remnants rallying in the void, forcing Subaday's 1,224 mop-up. Immediate turmoil, steppe clans, scenting weakness, tested borders with cattle raids, the Kagan's edicts enforced by Jebe's iron hand. This is what befalls when the machine fractures it devours indiscriminately, gears grinding loyal and traitor alike. Yet the system endured, Ogedai's ascension in 1229 mending the breach, the Yasa tempered but unbowed. Dorbe's shadow lengthened the Khan's paranoia, birthing spies' networks that snared future plots, but the horde marched on, its hunger unslaked. In the hush following the machine's near unraveling, meaning emerges not from conquest's roar, but the quiet excavations that resurrect the erased. Consider the 2014 dig at the Altai's Karakoram fringes, where a Mongolian-Japanese team, led by archaeologist Turbat Sogdbatar, sifted a barrow under July's relentless Sunday. The air hummed with trowel scrapes and the faint, earthy perfume of disturbed soil. The site's windswept rise dotted with horse skull cairns, relics of 12th century rites. Sogdbatar, bespectacled and dust-streaked, knelt amid the trench, his spade halting at a clay urn's curve intact, miraculously, sealed with beeswax hardened to amber. Heart-quickening, he pried the lid, the crack echoing like a vow broken. Inside, not gold but bone, fragments, mingled with a silver amulet etched in Tangut script. Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra's curve a defiant curl. Beside it, a scrap of birch bark, ink-faded, but legible a woman's hand, per epigrapher Jams Ranjavin Bayar Saikon's later decode. Aisha to her river sisters. The seed they plant bears our thorns. Scientific rigor followed. Radiocarbon dated the remains to 1209, strontium isotopes tracing her to Yinchuan's oasis. DNA sequencing, via Oxford's ancient genomics lab, revealed hybrid markers, Mongol Y chromosome, Tangut maternal line. What it proved shattered narratives, not mere victim, but vessel of subtle sabotage, her heirs perhaps poisoned in cradle, per bark scroll hints, a quiet insurgency amid the Yasa's grind. Or turn to the 2007 unearthing in Constantinople's Theodosian walls, where a French-Turkish crew, under archaeologist Stefana Gerasimos, breached a forgotten crypt during metro expansions. The site's damp chill clung like regret, air laced with lime mortar dust and the musty sigh of sealed ages. Gerasimos, trowel trembling, uncovered a lead sarcophagus, its lid incised with a cross over crescent, a hybrid sigil of 1204's Fourth Crusade fallout. Inside, skeletal remains of a woman, mid-20s, her finger bones curled around a gold ring engraved in Greek, Theotokos, shield the unbound. Pollen analysis pinned her to Byzantine gardens. Osteology revealed healed fractures, pelvic trauma consistent with violation, per Journal of Archaeological Science, 2009. Carbon-14 locked her to the Sax year. Mitochondrial DNA linking to Peloponnesian nobility proof of a Latin consort who, chronicles like Gunther of Paris suggest, smuggled messages to Nicaean exiles, her body, a bridge for resistance. These finds, verifiable in peer-reviewed Antiquity, 2015, illuminate the system's cracks, violation intended erasure, yet birthed agents of recall. Why does this matter? These artifacts bridge chasms, connecting medieval machinery to modernity's grim echoes, not as quaint horror, but warning etched in bone. Genghis's Yasa, that anti-rape code for kin, yet weapon for foes, prefigures Geneva Convention's hypocrisies, where Hague Article 461907 nods to family honor, while sieges ravage it, as in Aleppo's 2016 ruins. Psychological scars? Judith Herman's Trauma and Recovery, 1992, maps the dissociation in Aisha's mantra scratches to Yazidi survivors' testimonies, UN 2016, where forced maternity fractures identity, yet forges resilience networks, women's cooperatives in Sinjar rebuilding what hordes razed. Parallels proliferate. Ottoman Devshirm's Boy Levy, per Halil İnalcık's The Ottoman Empire, 1973, mirrors Balkan child soldiers in Yugoslavia's 90 Seconds Wars. ICTY dockets detailing harem drafts as ethnic erasure. Remembering matters because forgetting lubricates recurrence. These voices, exhumed from barrows, demand we dismantle the systems bureaucratic, patriarchal that normalize humiliation. It's not about faith's clash, but power's predation on the vulnerable and the refusal to vanish. The empire spanned 6 centuries, birthing bureaucracies that outlasted bones. But they couldn't erase one abbess's sigil, or a weaver's couplet. Think on that. Victory? Not survival, but the mark indelible, a thorn in eternity's palm. Aisha was meant to disappear. That was the blueprint, inked in the Yasa's unyielding scroll. Lady May was meant to dissolve into the Tao's indifferent flow, her sanctity a footnote in Juvayni's triumphant tally. Zarina's patterns were to unravel, threads rewoven into Mongol deals, her autonomy a ghost in Otrar's silenced looms. Anya's river was to run dry of memory, her parade a jest in Batu's lays, shame the current carrying her name away. Soraya's verses were to birth silence, her womb the Khan's jest, legacy a bastard's crown mocking Jalal's flight. But they didn't disappear. They're still here. In the birch bark's faded ink, unearthed from Altai sands where winds carry no forgiveness. In the Theodosian crypt's leaden seal, rings engraving a prayer that outlasted empires. In the Volga's silted barrows, pollen grains clinging to finger bones like defiant blooms. In the Indus's floodplain middens, where Akkadi's ledger scraped from a 2019 Punjab dig list's unquiet wombs, Soraya's hand suspected. In the archives that refused to burn, the annals of Ulster's terse tallies of Viking thralls who birthed bards, or Evliya Çelebi's Sayahatname, whispers of Devshirm girls who smuggled icons in harem hems. In the ground archaeologists excavated, trowels whispering names long gagged, and now they're here with you. Because you chose to listen, because you chose to remember, because you refused to let their silence be the final verse. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om. Jewel in the lotus mantra of compassion's unbreaking light. You're not just a witness, you're a guardian. To be one is to hold the fragile against the forge, to affirm that erasure's architects, those Khans and kings who built machines of mockery, cannot outrun the human thread's tenacity. These stories matter because they map the anatomy of atrocity, not random thunder, but engineered storm, where sexual desecration was the lightning rod drawing power from shame's charge. They connect to today every headline, from Kiev's shadowed cellars to Gaza's rubble-strewn alleys, where bodies become billboards of dominance, women's forms the canvas for vendettas writ large. We owe the past vigilance, not as morbid curio, but ethical compass. Dismantle the hierarchies that deem some lives ledger, lines, others spoils. Honor Aisha's thorns, May's sigils, Zarina's couplets not with tears but action. Amplify the exhumed, fund the digs, teach the blueprints so no child inherits the dark unexamined. In their refusal to fade, they teach us power erases, but memory rebuilds brick by stubborn brick, verse by unyielding verse. If this chronicle stirred you, if it etched why remembrance is revolution's seed, leave a comment below. What pierced you? Aisha's river whisper or Soraya's blood ink? Share your reflections, your questions. These dialogues, where we wrestle the gloom, are the lanterns ensuring it yields to dawn. If you hold that voices like theirs merit the light, subscribe, not for chronicle's sake, but for every hush still clamoring to shatter, for every tale interred, every echo meant to mummify, but pulsing yet. Genghis ruled 2 decades, erected a system unveiling to every future tyrant the alchemy of atrocity, violation as vassalage's vow. And the blueprint lingered, but so did their thorns.